This is Ben May, and I want to thank you for joining us as we continue to seek the old paths. That is our stated purpose, to get back to God's Word, to see what God has to say about any given matter as it relates to our service to Him. Now, what we're doing now is we are engaging in a study of Genesis. And whether you have been with us for many times or whether this might be the first time you've sort of come across us, we welcome you and we thank you for being here, and I believe this will be 30 minutes of time well spent. Again, as I mentioned, we've been studying in the book of Genesis, and we have come now all the way to chapter 37. So if you have your Bible and would like to take it and open it up and study with us, and if you have ordered your study guide, we encourage you to turn to page 97 in your book, and we'll start there in just a minute or two. Now let me say this, speaking of the study guide, you know, it's time. It's time to order the next one. So if you have already ordered one in the past, or maybe you have not, now's the time to get ready for our next study. Now when we finish the book of Genesis, we will have completed the first 4 periods of time that we have divided the Bible into. We talked about before the flood, and the flood, the scattering of the people, and the patriarchs. Now the next period of time would be the Exodus, and we will be studying Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and I believe the first 5 chapters of the book of Joshua. The study guide that's next is, as this one is an excellent reference tool. And so I encourage you to order this. It's free of charge. But what it would do, it will help to give you more information about the places and the times, and tie in some references to other parts of the Bible that will help enrich your own study of God's Word. And so again, I encourage you to, let's go ahead and start getting ready. It'll be probably 3 or 4 weeks from now that we will start that study in the book of Exodus. But now let's get now to one of my favorite stories, and perhaps my favorite story in the Old Testament, I suppose, and that's about Joseph. Now, if I had to put a title on the lesson today, I'd say it would be From the Pit to the Palace, because that's what we're going to see. We're going to talk about now the study of Joseph's rise to power. And really what we are seeing in this is we're seeing God's providence in the life of Joseph. And what I believe you and I can be encouraged by is if we are living our life for God and we are endeavoring to walk with Him, to be assured that He is walking with us. And we see that so clearly in the life of Joseph. Now, we have talked about a lot of wonderful Bible characters leading up to Joseph. We take a look now at the family tree. We find that we started mainly with a man named Terah. Terah had 4 children that we know of: Nahor, Haran, Abraham, and Sarah. Now Abraham is the father, you might say, of the patriarchs. He's the father of the Jews. He's the father of the faithful. So many things are attributed to Abraham because God picked him to carry out some wonderful promises that are fulfilled throughout the pages of the Bible. Now Abraham had a son named Isaac. Now he also had some other children, but Isaac is the son or the child of promise. It's through Isaac that God would continue these promises that He started with Abraham. And then Isaac had twin boys, Jacob and Esau. But Jacob is the child of promise, and it's through Jacob that God would continue to work and fulfill the promises He made to Abraham. And then Jacob is going to have 12 children. We find that he has a wife named Leah, and there are wonderful stories behind all of these, aren't there? But time, of course, would not permit us to go over them again. Leah has 4 sons to begin with: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. But now Rachel, Jacob's other wife, the one he truly favored and loved, God saw that Leah was not loved and Rachel was, and so she was not allowed to have children. And yet, at least for now, Rachel decides to give her handmaid Bilhah to her husband Jacob so that she could have children through her handmaid, you might say. And Bilhah does just that. She has Dan and Naphtali. Well, Leah thinks that she had stopped having children, and she gives her handmaid Zilpah to her husband Jacob, and through Zilpah, Gad and Asher are born. Well, then Leah starts having children again, and she has Issachar and Zebulun. But here's Rachel. No children yet. And finally, God remembers Rachel and allows her to have Joseph. And then she also has Benjamin. Sadly, Rachel dies in childbirth with the coming of Benjamin. But what we see now is that we see God is going to continue working at this point mainly through Joseph. Now, Joseph is not, you might say, the child of promise, but he is the one through whom God is working to fulfill his promises that really now apply to all 12 of the sons. But we'll see particularly through Judah, because Judah is the one through whom Christ will come. But now the land promise, remember, and the make him a mighty nation would apply to all 12 sons of Jacob. So here's Joseph. Joseph is just a wonderful story. But now let's think about these brothers now, some of them that Joseph has. Remember Simeon and Levi, how they killed the men of Shechem because they defiled their sister Dinah. Remember Judah's sin with Tamar that we briefly mentioned last time, how that Judah was supposed to give his youngest son to Tamar, and he didn't, and Tamar ended up posing as a prostitute, and Judah ended up having a child through his own daughter-in-law. It's a sad story, but that's Judah. And then there's Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, how he actually slept with Rachel's handmaiden Bilhah. And so Joseph has some brothers who are not all that they ought to be. And then starting in chapter 37, and really the last 13 of the 14 chapters in Genesis deal with Joseph. So the Bible takes a lot of time to tell us the story of Joseph. Now Joseph was a shepherd with his other brothers, but now remember he's the next to the youngest, had been the youngest for a long time. Israel, remember Israel and Jacob are the same one. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, so the Israelites, the God of Israel, all those sayings now stem from Jacob. Well, Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children, and he made him a coat of many colors. Now because of that, because that Jacob loved Joseph the most and showed obviously that he did by doing things for him he didn't do for the rest of them, his brothers hated him. In fact, we also know that they hated him because Joseph told on them. I don't know what they were doing, but he brought a bad report about Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. But are there some good lessons for those of us who are parents here? If you have children, or maybe one day will have children, think very carefully about the danger of showing favoritism among your children. It just leads to trouble. Earlier in our study, we find that Isaac, who would be Joseph's grandfather, he favored Esau. Rebekah, Joseph's grandmother, favored Jacob, Joseph's father. Well, that caused problems, didn't it? Well, God sets the example for us, because in Romans chapter 2 and verse 11, the Bible says, "For there is no partiality with God." God does not love you more than me or me more than you. He loves all of his children the same. And he shows no partiality. He shows no favoritism. So parents, we need to learn that lesson. But now Joseph, we find, has some dreams, has two dreams. And the first one he dreamed, that they were out, he and his brothers were out binding wheat in the field. And lo and behold, Joseph's bundle stood right straight up. And then all of the other bundles, which would be his brothers, they bowed down to his. He had another dream. And he dreamed that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. Now, they did not miss that at all. They understood perfectly well the implication of that dream. In fact, in Genesis 37, in verse 8, his brother said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his word. So do you see this very bad relationship now between Joseph and his other brothers? Well, process of time, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers. Remember, he had done that before and didn't go so well. But Joseph goes, as his father tells him to do, to find his brothers. Well, he goes where they're supposed to be, and he can't find them. And somebody said, I think they've gone on down to Dothan. And so he starts out at Shechem, where they were, and then he goes on down to Dothan. And really, it goes north on the map. Well, they see him coming. And as they see him coming, they plotted to kill him. In fact, in Genesis 37 and in verse 19, then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. Do you see how much they were bothered by the dreams of their younger brother? That they would kill him to try to keep their dreams from coming true? Well, Reuben, the oldest, he is not wanting to kill Joseph. And he says, now, let's just throw him into this pit over here. Let's not kill him. Like, as if the blood would not be on our hands. But what Reuben had in mind, he was going to come back later and get Joseph out of the pit and take him back to his father. Well, they took Joseph, and for whatever reason, they took the coat of many colors off of him. Remember, I don't think I mentioned that. Remember that Jacob made for Joseph a coat of many colors? And people who study the language say that coat probably was one that went all the way from the shoulders all the way down to the ankles, probably not one you typically work in. And there's Joseph coming, he's wearing his coat. And they take that coat off of him, which evidently they did not like at all, and they throw him into the pit, and then just very casually, they sit down to eat. Can you imagine Joseph's reaction as he's down there in the pit? He is probably saying everything in the world to his brothers. He's pleading with them. He's angry with them and begging maybe part of the time. I don't know what Joseph is doing. It can't be good. So he's down in the pit, and his brothers are sitting around eating. Well, then a caravan of Ishmaelites approached. Now see this picture now. They started to kill him. So, well, no, we'll throw him in the pit. I'm assuming just to leave him there. And then now here comes a caravan of Ishmaelites. I want us to notice that God is with Joseph every step of the way. God knew that Joseph was down there in that pit. You ever wondered sometime, thought maybe, does God know that I'm down in the pit? Does He know what I'm going through? He knows. God is faithful. And God knew exactly where Joseph was. And He also knew where He wanted Joseph to end up. And so lo and behold, as God's providence would have it, not as luck would have it, not as chance would have it, as God's providence would have it, here comes a caravan of Ishmaelites, also known as Midianites. Well, Judah sees them and says, why should we not get anything for this? Let's at least make a profit here. We'll sell Joseph as a slave. Well, the Ishmaelites bought Joseph and they took him to Egypt. Well, what are they going to tell their dad? That he sent Joseph to find out about his brothers, and they come home and Joseph is not with them. So what they do is they take Joseph, take his coat rather, and they take one of the animals and they kill it, one of the goats, and they dip the coat of many colors into the blood of that animal. And they take it back to their father. Think about, they sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. And the law of Moses set a price of 30 pieces of silver to redeem a slave that you might have hurt or killed even. Joseph's brothers sold him for 20 pieces of silver. They really didn't like him, did they? Not even the price of a slave. Well, Jacob sees this coat. It's all torn up. It's dipped in this animal blood. They didn't have DNA testing. They didn't know what Jacob, it looked like human blood. There's no reason to think anything other than some wild beast had attacked and killed his son. Jacob tore his clothes and mourned. He refused to be comforted. They all gather around the father, trying to lift his spirits up, trying to comfort him, and he'd have none of it. In Genesis 37 and verse 35, and all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Can you see the anguish now of Jacob? All the while, 9 boys here, men now, they know the truth. They know that Joseph is alive. And yet here's their father. And no reason to doubt that they love their father. And yet they allow him to go through that mourning just to cover themselves. Let me ask you this question. Did they lie? Did they lie? Isn't it still wrong to lead someone into believing a lie though you didn't say it yourself? Think about what they did. They brought the coat and they said, here it is. Do you recognize it? They didn't say, here is Joseph's coat. We think an animal has killed him. No, they just brought it to him. We found this. And Jacob, of course, draws the conclusion, nobody has a coat of many colors like that except Joseph, and it's covered with blood, and Joseph is nowhere around. He is therefore has been killed by some wild animal. Isn't it still wrong to lead someone into believing a lie, though you didn't say it yourself? You ever seen people like that? Maybe you've done it yourself. You didn't tell a person whatever it was. They concluded it based on maybe other things, and you allow them to believe a wrong conclusion. Is that not still the same thing? Is that not deceptive? The psalmist said in Psalm 5 and verse 6, you shall destroy those who speak falsehood. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. They were deceitful. At the very least, they were deceitful and hard-hearted to watch their father suffering like that. Well, now, in the meantime, Joseph is with the Midianites, remember, and the caravan on his way to Egypt. And so he gets to Egypt and he's sold to an officer of Pharaoh named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar was evidently an influential person, probably had a lot of servants and a nice estate had to be taken care of and such. Well, Potiphar now, as time goes by, he notices how God was with Joseph and made all he did to prosper. Now, we're not told the details of all that, but we just know that Potiphar could tell things were better now. Now, Potiphar would not be a believer in God, but perhaps he knew Joseph was, and things were going well for him. And so what does he do? He makes Joseph overseer of his house and all that he had. Remember, God knew that Joseph was down in the pit, and he's with him. He knew when his brothers wanted to kill him. And he knew now he's in Egypt. And now, lo and behold, Potiphar, an influential person, buys Joseph, and God makes sure things goes right with Potiphar's house. But Joseph evidently was a very handsome young man, and unfortunately, Potiphar's wife started to take notice of him. Now, you think about Joseph, he comes from pretty good stock, doesn't he? Remember, his mother Rachel was a beautiful woman. That's the one Jacob just fell head over heels over when he got to Laban's home. But think about Jacob's mother. You think about Rebekah. Why, Rebekah was a beautiful woman. Jacob was concerned about how other people might harm him to get to her. And then you think about Jacob's mother. You think about, Isaac's mother. Think about Sarah. Why, she was a beautiful woman, wasn't she? When she was 90 years old, a king sent to have her. And so just pretty good line of folks that were very handsome or attractive people. And here Joseph is, a very handsome young man, and the wife of Potiphar now has set her eyes on him, and she pleads with him to lie with her. Here's a young man. He was 17 years old when he gets to Potiphar's home. Now, we're not told how much time has gone by, but he was 17, a young single man. And here's this woman just pleading with him to commit adultery or fornication with her. But Joseph resists the temptation. Joseph is a faithful man. In fact, he says in Genesis 39 and verse 8, but he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Now, let's think about what Joseph is saying. Not only is it to his credit and a statement of his faith in God that he would resist this temptation, but notice what he said. How can I do this great evil and sin against God? Let me ask you, who have we sinned against? Now, Joseph acknowledged that the good that his master had done him, and he did not want to sin against his master. Sometime I'm afraid we might say that we maybe told something about someone that wasn't true. Maybe we didn't do for someone what we knew we should have done for them. Whatever, that we know we have wronged someone. And sometimes that's just how we think of it. Well, I sure did them wrong in that. Ultimately, who is it that we sin against? Joseph understood that ultimately all sin is against God. David said in Psalm 51 in verse 4, against you, you only have I sinned and done this great evil in your sight, that you may be found just when you speak and blameless when you judge. And yet David is writing about his sin with Bathsheba. King David saw a woman, wanted her, made sure her husband was killed so he could have her, and to cover up the fact that she had gotten pregnant by him. And yet David would say to God, against you, you only have I sinned. In the ultimate sense, all sin is against God. When we do wrong, we need to remember it is not against mere man. Oh, we don't need to do each other wrong, but we ought to be more concerned that our sin is against God himself. Well, Potiphar's wife, she doesn't give up on Joseph every day. She's after him, but he refuses, to his credit. That one day, though, she finally caught him by himself alone in the house, and she just reached out and grabbed him. Well, Joseph just runs. He leaves his garment there. She has such a hold on it, he just slips out of it. And he flees. But now Potiphar's wife is left holding his garment, and she sees that as an opportunity, and she cries out to the others who are outside, look what this Hebrew slave has tried. He's made advances to me. He's tried to force himself on me. She tells her husband the same story. Well, Satan's very patient, isn't he? Day after day, Joseph is resisting. But he waits for an opportunity to get Joseph to sin. And really, Satan could use this either way, couldn't he? If Joseph continues to resist, he could do as is happening. Still, Joseph could be accused of it, though he's innocent. If he had given in to the sin, the very young man that God is going to use to help fulfill his promises to Abraham would be involved in sin, and certainly that would not be a good thing, and Satan would have won some battle there. Satan's patient. He's patient in our lives. Is it any wonder that we are warned to flee fornication? It's the kind of sin that one day we may be strong, and the next day we might be weak. It is such a strong lust that we have, that lust of the flesh. Well, Potiphar, needless to say, was very angry with Joseph, and he puts him in prison. Here again, Joseph was in the pit. Things went better for him, and now he's in prison. He's done no wrong. Where's Joseph's faith? Has he wavered? Not in the least. There is no indication that Joseph ever doubted God. God is faithful. God knows exactly where Joseph is. He's now in prison. And so God makes sure things go well with Joseph in prison. In fact, the prison keeper realizes that, and he puts Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. Then one day, there's an interesting duo, you might say, that's put into prison. Pharaoh's butler and chief baker were cast into prison in Genesis chapter 40, first 4 verses. And then one night they each had a dream. And Joseph comes in the next morning. There they are. They're depressed, and nobody could interpret their dreams for them. And so in Genesis 40 and verse 8, Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. And so they do. The butler says to Joseph, he says, I had this dream, and there was a grapevine with 3 branches. The vine budded, and it blossomed, and it produced grapes. And then he squeezed the grapes and gave the drink to Pharaoh. Well, in Genesis 40 and verse 12, Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head and restore you to your place, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner when you were his butler. Well, that went pretty well, so the baker tells them his dream. He said, I had 3 baskets of bread on my head. The top basket was for Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate the goods out of the top basket. Well, Genesis 40 and verse 18, Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you. Not a very good interpretation, but it was the truth. Joseph asked one thing of the butler. He says, remember me when you come back before Pharaoh. Well, in 3 days, the butler was restored to his place, and the baker was hanged, just as Joseph had interpreted. But the butler did not remember Joseph. How would you feel? What if you were Joseph, an innocent man? Your brothers had betrayed you. You thought they were going to kill you. You were sold into slavery. You ended up in Potiphar's house. His wife falsely accused you of trying to lie with her. And now you've done a good thing, you would think, for a man that has the very ear of Pharaoh. How would you feel? A week goes by, and you think, any day now, they're going to come get me out of this place. No news. A month goes by. 6 months goes by. A year, 2 years. Nothing. How would your faith stand up to that? Joseph didn't waver. It reminds me of what Isaiah said in Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 31. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That was Joseph. 2 years has gone by, and Pharaoh has 2 dreams. He called the scribes and the wise men in to interpret this dream, but they couldn't do it. And then the butler remembered. He remembered Joseph, and he told Pharaoh the story about them in prison. Well, Pharaoh summons Joseph to interpret his dreams, and after Joseph gets himself cleaned up, he comes in the presence of Pharaoh. Let me ask you this. Have you ever forgotten to do something that you promised to do? Haven't we all done that? I hope we'll do as the butler did. Just admit it. I remember my fault this day, the butler said. But let's also be willing to remind the one maybe that has forgotten to do something for us. Remind them. Don't hold ill will toward them. Many people are guilty of doing that. So Pharaoh tells his dream to Joseph, and he says, these 7 fat cows were eating by the river, and 7 skinny cows come out of the river, and they eat the fat ones, and they're still just as skinny as ever. And then I saw these 7 heads of grain come up on one stalk, plump and good. And then these 7 thin heads come along, and they eat the 7 fat, good heads, and they're still just as skinny as ever. Well, Joseph explained that God was showing Pharaoh what was to come. He said there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of a great famine that'll make everybody forget the 7 years of plenty. And he even tells Pharaoh, now you need to set a wise man over Egypt to prepare for this famine. He even tells him how much of the excess of the 7 years of plenty to set aside. Well, Pharaoh saw that God was with Joseph. And he sets Joseph over all of Egypt, second only to himself. Can you imagine? He even renames Joseph Sabaneth Pania, preserver of life, and gives him a wife. From the pit to the palace is what we have seen in the story of Joseph. I want us to remember that God is faithful. God knew every place where Joseph was, and he could use Joseph every place, in every situation. And can he do the same with us? I'm reminded of what Paul said in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11. He said, not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. May that be our attitude. May that be our relationship. If things are going bad or things are going well, I can handle it. I can deal with it. I can be faithful because God is. From the pit to the palace. Be with us next time as we continue to look at this wonderful story of Joseph and how God is being with him. Thank you for being with us. Very soon we are going to see the King. Soon and very soon we are going to see the King. Soon and very soon we are going to see the King. Hallelujah, hallelujah, we're going to see the King. No more crying there, we are going
see the King. No more crying there. We are going to see the King.